Hello, everybody. Welcome to Wholehearted Loving. I'm Stephanie.
Hi, I'm Georgiana.
Today, we're going to be doing a practice based on A Course in Miracles, which we will say more about. But before we do that, I will tell you that you can find self-reflection prompts on our Instagram, which is at Wholehearted Loving. So each episode has self-reflection prompts, which you can find there. And before we get started, we are going to do a body-based self-connection practice to connect with ourselves before we connect with each other and this podcast.
Okay, so today's practice is a little bit different, I think, than practices we've done before, in that we usually focus on noticing our bodies, which we'll still do, but we're going to add in something else to notice, which is our minds. So we can start with feeling whatever is really apparent to you that your body is touching. So I feel my butt on the ottoman. I feel my forearms on my lap. And I notice a natural desire to just pay attention to my breath. And then we will find something to look at. It can be anything. And as we look at this thing, we're going to allow our mind to do what our mind does and see what thoughts arise as you look at this thing. You might notice the pace of the thoughts that are coming up, whether they have a similar theme or maybe it's the same thought. And then we'll let our eyes glance around the room and land on another thing to look at. And again, I'm bringing some awareness to what my hands are touching. My hands are touching my leg, and I'm looking at a water bottle. And I'm just staying here to see what comes up in my mind as I look at this water bottle. And then we'll do it one more time. This time perhaps looking at the space behind you or at a space that you haven't really looked at yet. And again, finding an object, noticing your body. I feel my hand touching my dress and have actually a big clump of fabric in my hand. And I'm noticing what thoughts arise as I look at a plant. And then we'll just come back to sitting or being in a way that's comfortable for your body. Mm-hmm. Would you be open to sharing what happened with your mind?
Yes. Not a whole heck of a lot. The first thing I looked at is ugly. It's a metal bit that a sliding door connects onto. And I saw it, took a breath, and thought, this is ugly, and I do not wish to look at this anymore. So I looked at a dress that's hanging on a laundry basket. And then I thought, oh, I should probably hang that up. I should do the laundry. And I wonder how my boobs will look in that dress without a bra. And then I looked at a plant outside. We have this giant clematis that was dying, so we've cut it mostly down, but have been impeded by a metal mesh thing that needed a tool that we didn't have. So there's this big dead clematis right outside my window. And then so it carried over from the laundry, the dress and the laundry. It was like, oh, another thing I have to do was the flavor of thought.
Neat.
And then I thought it might feel nice to look at an alive plant.
Instead of a dying plant?
Yeah. And the flavor of thought continued to, I need to dust that leaf. And then I thought, that old dusty leaf, there's a nice new fresh leaf behind it, which I would prefer to look at. And then I noticed the veins in this leaf, which I had never noticed before in this. It's a monstera plant. And I have somehow not been in the light or proximity to notice the veins in it. And that was pleasant.
Neat.
Yeah. At some point in there, I thought, wow, these thoughts are much more quiet and well ordered than my thoughts used to be when I looked at
Mm.
objects.
So, could you give us a glimpse maybe into like how your thoughts might have been like before when you looked at objects like the ones you looked at?
Yeah.
Like,
So the
what would have been the flavor and the pace of it? I'm curious.
so the pace like 15 times faster, way more content. Still, the flavor of should is that's the only thing that's sort of carried over.
Mhm.
But largely, when I started this work, the thoughts would have had nothing to do with the objects. They would have been a series of shoulds that were probably related to the instructions you had given or the people who were around or whatever was happening in my life. I was sort of a master of compartmentalizing and thinking through all the different compartments and not being
Mhm.
present with whatever was happening in the moment.
So, I'm curious. Say, if you were looking at that dress hanging over the basket, like, say you rewound some years back, what
Mm-hmm.
would have maybe been some examples of thoughts that would have come up for you?
Like elaborate fantasies, elaborate maybes and hopes and self admonishments. So, like, I might think about who might see me in that dress and what they might think and how it would look if I looked different and then what that somebody might like and who else they might like or want to look at. And um, yeah, just
So,
unrelated, made up, optional mental suffering for sure.
right. And like an abundance
Oh,
of
yes,
them.
so much. Yeah, yeah.
Neat.
What about you?
So first I looked at my doll, my Jilly Bing doll. And what's interesting is I've looked at her many times before, and sometimes I look at her and immediately I have a thought of like, oh, she looks like me. How sweet. There's a doll that looks like me. But interestingly enough, today when I looked at her and noticed my thoughts, I was like, her hair isn't perfect. It's
Oh,
messy. and and yeah, that stuck more. And then I think I noticed like, well, that's not a really nice thought to sit with. So then I chose to look at her face instead. I'm like, oh, that's a sweet face. And it changed how I felt about looking at the same object, but just orienting to a different part. Right. And then I noticed when I went back to the hair, I was like, oh, yeah, it is a bit messy. All right. I probably need to do something about that. And then my next thing was a water bottle. And this was interesting, I think, because I've practiced this slower presence so much more now. I didn't initially have any thoughts about it. Mine was sort of blank. And I remember that has used to never be a state of being of mine. I remember the first time I had no thought in my mind. I was actually like, it was over a decade ago, sitting with a counselor, and I was like, something just happened. Like, what happened? I said, I had no thought, just for a moment, no thought. I was like, is this what it's like for people to have like not a single thought? And we just laughed together. So I looked at this thing and there was really no thought. And then I paused a little longer, and then thoughts come of, oh, I like that bottle. Oh, I should really drink more water. Oh, I think I need to clean it. And then I was like, those don't feel like fun thoughts to keep circulating around my brain. So then I went to, oh, remember that time when my son like was throwing a lacrosse ball with a stick and he hit the bottle and he hit it so hard that it dented the thing, and it was such a funny moment for us. And then that thought shifted the feeling to a more lighthearted feeling. I also noticed my eyes were then drawn to the things of Tupperware on my counter of food that needs to be composted.
Mm.
And I remember like the eyes going there for a bit. And I'm like, no,
Nope.
go back to the bottom. So that was neat too, because I don't think I would have had that awareness in the past, and I wouldn't have had that muscle as strong to be able to bring my focus and attention back to the bottle. Because looking at the stuff that has to be composted is sort of gross. Like, it's not a good feeling thing. And then knowing me and old patterning, it probably would have started a whole thing of I should do this, I should do that, I have to do this still.
Right.
I'm like, I don't, in this moment where I'm chatting with you, we're recording a podcast, I don't really need to. It doesn't really serve me to think about all those things.
Right.
Yeah. So
you
then,
could hold all of that in your consciousness. You could fracture yourself into 13 pieces and keep each piece worrying about the thing that needs to happen somewhere in your life. Or you could choose to bring your focus here and have this conversation, right?
Yeah. And know that that's going to get taken care of later.
Yeah.
Then I looked at a plant, and one of the first thoughts was, oh, that plant has shriveled. And it was, oh, it once was not shriveled. It was so much prettier when it was not shriveled. And then again, I guess I noticed that's not a fun feeling thought. And I already know that watering it would be more helpful, and I'm already working on that. So there's no purpose in thinking more about how it doesn't look very nice shriveled now.
Yes.
And so then I started looking at the pot, and the pot is very pretty. And I was like, oh, that feels nice to enjoy the pot that I feel like is a very pretty pot. And that felt better.
Great. Magic.
And I would have never, that's not how I would have been with things before.
Yeah, what were your thoughts like before?
Okay, if I looked at the doll, I'd been like, your hair is messy. See, I don't take good care of things. And that was something that, you know, my parents said to me a lot. Like, you got to take good care of your things. You don't take good care of your things. And it would have like shifted from just an observation about an object to some identity piece about myself in a not fun, fabulous, uplifting way.
Yeah.
And then probably would have been like, oh, I should really like take better care of her. You know, her hair is dusty and I could brush it a little bit. And if I really cherished her and valued her, then I would take better care of her and whatever. And then it would probably go into, but I told myself, like, I know that she matters to me. This doll is special to me. Why am I not taking better care of it? And then it would just go on and on.
Right.
It would never occur to me to switch thoughts or switch focus to look at her face and how cute it is. It would never occur to me that I could change the focus or change the thoughts, or that these thoughts are optional and not very good feeling. It just would have been, this is how it is. Yeah. If I look at this, this is how I'm going to feel. Looking at the water bottle, I think old thoughts would have said, you should really be drinking a lot more water. You used to be so good at it, but you're not so good at it anymore. See, you're not very good at keeping up good habits. So like, again, like that identity, like the you're not very good at, and see, you know, like that flavor. And then I probably would have completely gotten sucked in by the compost of like, you should have done that already. Why isn't it done? That's pretty nasty. That's gross. It's going to be gross when you have to do it later, and all the things.
All the things.
Yeah. And then it would have been, should I just throw it all away? Just throw the containers away? Oh no, that's wasteful. Oh no, now I'm a wasteful person as well as like a whatever kind of person. I don't know.
Right.
And then the plants would have been, see, I'm not very good at taking care of plants. I really shouldn't have plants. This happens every time. And I should really probably just throw them out and either start over or don't bother.
Right.
Like, very black and white.
I want to point out, every time you're having a new thing, you're starting by saying see, which is the language of us reinforcing our stories, right? Our negative self pattern of belief. See. Yeah, really neat to notice the
Yeah.
words we choose in our minds.
Isn't that wild how much is revealed from a simple exercise of just look at three things and notice what happens in your mind?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And for us, we're doing it with a little bit of a contrast of like before we grew the muscle to not attach meaning to things.
Yeah.
Before we grew the muscle to notice what I'm making things mean and
Yeah.
in the moment be able to report it and say it out loud without any shame.
Yeah. And what we unconsciously assume then other people make things mean, right? When you said the thing about Jilly having dusty hair and you redirected to looking at her cute face, that made me think about what we see when we look at ourselves and what other people might see. So
Oh,
we
yeah.
might look at ourselves and just be like, oh my God, my hair is so dusty. And another person will be looking at us going, oh, look how cute your face is, and we would be assuming they must just be looking at my dusty hair. So then we can't even inhabit the world where people don't notice our dusty hair and they just think we have a cute face.
I know. I mean, this reminds me of that exercise we did in women's group years ago where we stood in the middle of the room and the women in the circle observed us and like told us, and this was specifically the task is to speak about physical traits that people enjoyed about us or loved about us. And it was an uncomfortable exercise. And it was really eye-opening for me how other people saw me.
Yeah.
And how other people saw things in me that were beautiful that I could not see in myself. And I would have never paused at and noticed, would have never cherished. And I would have just either looked at that same thing and it through a negative lens or not even noticed it at all and focused on other things.
Yeah. And did you find that you believed them when they said it, or did you argue about it in your mind?
I noticed a difference. There was a part of me that wanted to believe it because I think I was like, I would feel better about myself if I could believe this. There was part that was like, what's wrong with you?
Right.
You obviously don't know what you're seeing. There was part of me that was like, oh, that's sweet of you to help me see that in that perspective. There was are you just saying this to be nice?
Right.
However, I think this is what matters. I chose to see the truth in what they were saying, even if it was just 1% truth. And I chose to keep practice looking for what it was that they saw.
Yeah.
And I think that is a muscle that has really helped me because I used to be very good at seeing what was great about other people and not so great at seeing what was great about myself. So what helped me was to listen to people's feedback about me and their experience with me and look for evidence that that might be true.
Yeah.
Good
move.
Good move.
Yeah. So the meaning that we make, this is kind of what the exercise we're going to do today is all about. Is there anything you want to say before we start talking about the exercise and the course?
I don't think so. I think maybe just that when I first read about the exercise, I thought it was dumb. And I didn't really know what a difference it would make in my life. And I was open to trusting. Like, let's just try it and see. And it actually made a big difference.
Right? So many things that are so important to us and that we now teach people and swear by. We started out thinking we're dumb. Silly, tiny.
We're dumb. It's all dumb. It's not going to make a difference.
Yeah. But we're so frustrated by where we are right now that we are willing to trust people who seem to feel less consternation than we do and do what they're suggesting. And magic.
It's I think it's a great muscle to grow, the willingness to just admit I think something is dumb, sounds dumb to me, can't really see why it would be helpful, and I'm open to trying.
Yeah.
And I remember in my job before as a counselor for parents, I was suggesting or planting the seed for parents to take a whole different way of looking at parenting and to approach parenting completely differently because what they were doing in their own words, was not working. And they wanted change in the outcome, but they didn't necessarily want to try something that sounded ridiculous to them.
Mm-hmm.
And I always, empathize with, yeah, it makes sense that you would think it's dumb. It's totally opposite to the blueprint in your mind of how parenting should be or what a good parent is. And I would ask them, are you open? Are you open to trying and just seeing, like whether it's for a day or 3 days or a week, and seeing what might change, what's possible? And then, some would say yes, some would be like, yeah, I think so. And then I always ended with, and you can always go back to your old ways.
Yeah.
And that seemed to settle people. They're like, oh, okay then. So you can always go back to making things mean all sorts of things that don't feel good and aren't helpful for you if you want to.
Always an option.
Well,
so A Course in Miracles is something that I initially would have thought was dumb, especially, so 2 things about it. First, it is a book that was channeled, which I would have been like, wow, that's nonsense. And 2, it's very religious-y sounding. So the woman who channeled this book is a medical psychologist at, I think, Columbia. Her name's Helen Schuckman. She channeled this in 1965. And I think it's so neat why this happened for her. She's not a religious person. She was tired of really contentious staff meetings that they had where she worked. And she left one day going, there has to be a better way. And that night, the better way was channeled. It was downloaded to her in the voice of Jesus. She was like, what is happening here? And the message was just to write it down. So she wrote and wrote. She had another medical psychologist who worked with her transcribing things as she was channeling them. I'm not exactly clear on their process, but certainly things that they were like, wow, this is dumb and insane, but it feels really important. So we're just going to trust the process and go with it. And now it's, a movement across the world. There's a book and a teacher's manual and guides and daily exercises you can do that might sound dumb and are super helpful. It's written in a very religious tone, using very religious words. So if you have trouble with that, if that doesn't resonate, just choose a different word. Choose to ignore references to Jesus and, choose a different name or being.
Yeah. So when I had heard, when I was deeper into this growth and healing work, I had heard the name of that book, The Course in Miracles, come up so many times. I'd heard people rave about it. And the curious part of me is like, what is this all about? Right. I think I went to the bookstore and found it. This book must be like hundreds of pages or like 1,000 pages. Like it's humongous.
Yeah.
And I think the original version of it, it's like that onion paper, like Bible paper.
Bible.
It's thin.
Yeah, it looks like a Bible. Yeah.
Right. And I think I opened it up and I was like, what the hell does this say?
It's
I don't understand it at all.
Yeah.
And so I think I was like, well, my old thought would have been like, maybe I'm not smart enough for this. Right. Obviously there's people I know who totally get it. It changes their life and they're all about it. They're in like practice groups for it. Like they can somehow distill something from this chaos on a page
they're pretending
to like do things that help change their life. Yeah. And then I have a persistent part in me, and the curious part in me was like, there must be some other ways. Right. And so I was looking for like, what is a dummies version? Those yellow books back in the 90s, they're really popular, like history for dummies or whatever. I was like, there must be some version of that. And then I found this book that is called The Course in Miracles Experiment, a starter kit for rewiring your mind and therefore the world. And it's by Pam Grout. And I was like, I like it. It's got just a 1-page summary for each day of the year, I guess, of some concept of it. And I believe each day like has something to practice, some lesson or something to practice. I haven't actually made my way through the book, and I'm okay with that. But I thought it might be nice for us to get to practice the first lesson together.
Yeah. I want to say the basic message of this book. So remembering that it was in response to this medical psychologist feeling that there had to be a better way, a better interpersonal way. And the response that came was basically love, that everything is love. And anything that isn't that is either a social construct or a mental construct or a construct of the ego. So a lot of these exercises are helping us unwind some of those constructs that we've developed for ourselves.
Mm-hmm. So what did I want to say about this on a practical level? This whole process of like being open to finding another version of it that resonate, right? You said, hey, if God and Jesus and whatever doesn't resonate with you, change the word. Well, I was so resistant, and I think mind was too rigid for that to even work for me. I'm like, I can't just change the word. Like, what the hell does this say? I don't understand it. Yeah. And like when I have to keep reading words about God, like it would, like this was like back in the day, it would just trigger something in me that would just shut me off of like, this is not for me. I don't identify with this. I don't understand this. So therefore all of this must be garbage and not useful. And so it was really helpful for me to learn to cater to my learning style at the time, which is if it's phrased simply and if it has nothing to do with God, I can be more open to it.
Fair.
Right? My old way of being was also if some part of it doesn't resonate or I don't understand it or I think it's dumb, then it all must be garbage. Right. So there must not be anything here for me that is helpful. And over the years, I've grown the muscle of like, I don't have to take on everything, but perhaps there's something in here that could help bring some positive change to my life. So without those mindset shifts, there'd be a lot of things I wouldn't have learned from going through this book and practicing the little lessons. So that's just a reminder to see about your willingness of being open, finding other ways that work for you.
Yes. Yeah, that's very important. So we're going to walk through this exercise, and I think it also will form our closing practice. Is that true?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
So, yes, did you want to say something?
I do not.
Okay. So, I'm going to read a little piece of the first lesson. And it says this: so shall we begin. Lesson 1. Nothing I see means anything. And I read it and I'm like, what the heck does that mean?
And I read it and I was like, oh, what a relief.
And I remember this lesson was also sort of taught to us in Landmark Forum. You know, I know a lot of people have done that. I've done it. And I think the teaching, the way it was taught there was life is empty and meaningless.
Inspiring.
And like, I remember having to really work hard with my mind to like understand what they were saying. But in the end, I understood what they were saying. And it's similar to, and maybe it was inspired by, you know, the Course in Miracles. I don't know where they got their piece from, but here's the lesson again. Nothing I see means anything. So to practice, it says for 1 measly minute, simply look around the room, out the window, whatever happens to be in your line of sight, and say, this lamp doesn't mean anything. This TV doesn't mean anything. This computer doesn't mean anything. That's it. As the Course says, you don't have to believe it. You don't even have to like it. So
you just have to do it.
You just have to do it and grow that muscle.
There's one thing I want to say, because we spoke about this a week or two ago, and it gave me a mindset shift that was really important for me. And I will try to articulate it now. These things can be really subtle and hard to put into words, but I used to really identify with the statement, that nothing means anything. How do they phrase it in Landmark? Life is empty and
Life
meaningless?
is empty and meaningless, meaning that like you give life its meaning.
Right.
Right.
So that second piece is important and eluded me. so So life is empty and meaningless. It was like, okay, great, nothing means anything. And in some ways that felt freeing, and in some ways it felt really depressing, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then I paired with that thought. So there's something about the way our body and our senses interpret data and make them make sense for our brains. And I don't mean that in the meaning making sense. I mean in the practical, physical reality that we experience, which is important. If a fly, is it a fly or a bee that has lots of eyes and sees things obviously very differently than humans do? For them, the TV is meaningless. The computer is meaningless,
Mm-hmm.
They do not have the sensory input devices that give meaning to this thing. So the way I started thinking about this when we spoke a couple of weeks ago was that because I have skin and fingers and nerves and eyes and ears and senses with which to interpret this data, I am imbuing all of these items with meaning that
Yes.
has some purpose in my worldly existence. And that feels empowering and not depressing at all.
Well, for me, it was realizing I can choose to give it the meaning of nothing, or I can choose a better feeling, more empowering meaning to give it. And when I was practicing this, and Landmark uses these words, is that an empowering thought or a disempowering thought? Is that an empowering story you're giving it or disempowering? And I like being able to differentiate between what's an empowering meaning, what's a disempowering meaning. I also came up with what's a neutral meaning. As
Mm-hmm.
neutral to me would also feel better than crappy.
Yep.
Right. So I've been practicing that over the years of noticing what I make things mean, whether it's empowering me, disempowering me, and what would be a more empowering thought or meaning to give it, or at the very least, a more neutral meaning thought to give it. But this took it to another level because this is like clearing the slate, saying it doesn't have to mean anything if you are willing to look at it through that lens.
Yeah.
And then you can give it the meaning that you want to.
Yeah.
Right?
Great.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to run through this and pair it with a little bit of feeling the bum, feeling the feet,
Yes.
feeling the breath. Yeah.
Yes. So let's, I'm actually have my hands on my feet.
Yeah, me too.
And so it's allowing yourself to find connection with your body and allowing yourself to find connection with your breath. And then finding something to look at. I see a leaf, right? And the phrase is, this leaf doesn't mean anything. So I'm going to say those words as I look at the leaf. And I'm going to allow myself to be here for a full inhale and exhale. And then I'm going to let my gaze shift to something else. I have this art piece on the wall of these people climbing up the wall. And I'm going to use that phrase again. This art piece doesn't mean anything. And I'm pausing very intentionally to feel my foot in my hand. I also notice that my nose is itchy. I'm just being here for a full breath. And I'm going to turn and find something else to look at. I see tissue paper flowers that my children once made me. And like, I notice the part of me that's like, I don't want to have that mean nothing.
Yes.
Right? It means something immediately. And I'm going to practice anyways. of these tissue paper flowers don't mean anything. And notice, I noticed like a little constriction in my chest of like, but wait, but they do. And then when I remind myself of they don't have to mean anything, and I can choose to give it meaning later if I want to, separate from this moment, then things settle again. And that's it, right? So practicing finding things to look at and being able to say this light doesn't mean anything.
It's interesting because objects that I was looking at before that brought up a bunch of I should do this, I should do that. In this context, I just feel a bunch of like defensiveness on the object's behalf. So I see the laundry basket. I'm not like, oh, I should do laundry. I'm like, this laundry basket doesn't mean anything, but I really like that laundry basket, and it holds my laundry. But none of the judgmental thoughts are there.
Neat. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Right. And so perhaps when you look at some things and you declare that it doesn't mean anything, you can actually access some more pleasant meaning thoughts.
Yeah.
Right. That you wouldn't have based on old autopilot patterns.
Yeah.
And this right now we're looking at objects, but I've found growing this skill so immensely helpful in my relationships. And how I see people, how I experience people, how I see myself and my own behavior of this doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
Right? And then I can choose what meaning I want to give it.
Yeah. I've also found this come up when objects have been lost or taken away, or relationships. One of the thoughts I can access now is something to do with the meaning I had made and how optional that was and is.
Well, what I'm noticing hearing you speak and sort of as we talk about this is the power of being able to go backwards almost and say it means nothing. Like I said earlier about wiping the slate clean, like start with a clean slate, and then I get to choose a meaning that's, if I want to, I get to choose a different meaning. And it, for some reason, it reminded me of when you make plans with friends and then they bail or they cancel or whatever. And I used to make that mean all sorts of things. They must not respect my time. They don't want to spend time with me. I can't count on them to like follow through. I'm obviously going to have a miserable time now because I don't get to do this thing. And then I practiced noticing what I make things mean. Then I grew this muscle of like, it means nothing. And then I got to practice, well, what meaning do I want to give it that would feel better? And then the new meaning I started giving those moments was, well, and I would prepare myself actually beforehand because I knew I had an old pattern of feeling bad because I had all these not pleasant meanings I would give to it. I said, let's try this different meaning, which is if they cancel, I get to do something else that feels good for me. And what else might that be? And I started not getting excited and hopeful that people would cancel, but I felt more at peace with it, that it would be okay and I'd still have a good time.
Yeah.
Right? I'm either going to get to do this fun thing with that person or I'm going to get to do another thing that feels good for me. Yeah. That kind of meaning and thought feels so much better.
Oh, yeah. And less labor involved in the long run.
Less resentments.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Amazing.
So it's been helpful.
Great. Is there anything else you want to say on this topic?
Maybe just see what things you think are dumb that maybe perhaps could bring some benefit to your life.
Yeah. Great. Okay. Well, then that's it for today's lesson from A Course in Miracles.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, then we will see you guys next week. Please do like, follow, and subscribe. And if anything has been said today that will be helpful for you, please share with somebody that you care about. And we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.